We want to welcome everyone watching this program on replay, and thank you for joining us. I'm Steve the Bookman Eisenstein, and this is the Rare Book Cafe, the first and only Blab TV show in the entire world about antiquarian books. Thank you for joining us on Blab.im. The Rare Book Cafe is brought to you by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. My regular guests for tonight are Thorne. Thorne's not here. My regular guest for tonight is a good friend and show creator, Allan Smith. And we are being joined by Michael Lister, a Florida writer, and from what we can see in the background, a very, very, very savoir-faire book collector. Later in the program, we'll be talking about the Hidden Treasures section. I actually went out and bought some books today. During that time, you and I, Michael, would show things that we would want to show the audience. I'll bring you into that. If you love unusual books, you won't want to miss this. We never know what we're going to buy from day to day or what we're going to re-find in our stores. Since Michael's a new guest, we are definitely going to put him through the third degree. It's not painful, Michael, but it's fun. As always, through the miracle of modern technology, visitors to our live show can send texts and comments. So click away. We'll be watching. Also, later in the program, if you have a question or at any time, type in a question mark, a slash, the letter Q, and a space, and we'll know you have a question. If you have questions, if you're listening to us right now, watching us right now, and you have a question about an antiquarian book that's been sitting around your house for ages, a piece of sheet music you found on the piano bench. I'll even take questions on fishing lures from the 1920s in boxes today. But we want to help you discover some treasure. So this is the place to ask and find out. And as an appraiser, I will tell you, if you ask me that question off air, I would charge you $150 an hour. So you're getting some good information here. And if everybody can see the little blue birds, I'm going to do that right now. I am going to post on Facebook. And I have just posted on Facebook. And everybody, if you have a Twitter account, thank you very much, let the world know we're doing this. The pair of hands that you see in the bottom corner of each picture represent, Blab calls them props. Basically, if you like what the speaker's saying, click on it, and we know that you like what we're saying because the numbers go up. Everything's got a rating. If you're new to the program and want to be alerted about other episodes, catch our things on Twitter and on Blab. And don't forget to join us Saturday from noon to 2 for Bucks on the Bookshelf on WDBFradio.com. Later on in the day, 2:30, right back here for the Rare Book Cafe on Blab.im. And finally, this program is being recorded so you or your friends can watch the replay on Blab or on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair blog at floridabookfair.blogspot.com. That's floridabookfair.blogspot.com. And as I said earlier, our special guest today is Michael Lister, a Florida writer and collector of antiquarian and I'm presuming modern first edition fiction. Michael, welcome to the show. Talk to us about what you write, what you collect, how you got started.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm fighting a cold, so I apologize for how I sound up front. But I was just thinking as you were talking that I was obviously a reader and a book collector before I ever became a novelist. And I think the two are related. I think it was my love of books. Of course, it was my love of reading that led me to be a writer. I forget who said it, but a writer is just a reader who was moved to emulation. And that is definitely me. But it had to come out of my love of books as well. I mean, I have always loved books as art objects, not just something that conveys information, or that conveys a story, but actual, as art objects. And I've always loved having them in my home. From the time I left home and went to college, I've always had a space of my own for my books. I remember my very first little small apartment after I got married that I took just one of the closets in the apartment and I turned it into a little library, and I've always had that. And now I have this room that I'm in now. My favorite room in our home is my library, and it has just tens of thousands of books, from philosophy and theology to fiction, and some of it is rare and antiquarian and collectible. Much of it are just reading copies that I go back to time and time again. As far as what I write, it's mostly in the mystery, suspense, thriller genre. I write about where I live, which is North Florida. Everything I write is set here. I have two main series going. One is about a detective who is a former cop from Atlanta and lives here in the Florida Panhandle and is a prison chaplain, and continues to serve as a detective in his demanding job as prison chaplain. I was a chaplain with the state of Florida for about a decade, and so I got to live the research and bring together the worlds of the hardboiled crime novel with the ecclesiastical sleuth. And I've always really liked both of those. And then I write a noir series set in the Panhandle in the 40s. Deals with it's the classic hardboiled detective type story that is very much influenced by film noir, and I've always liked that. I like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, and heavily influenced by them, but it probably equally film noir. And so that comes out. There's 5 books in that series so far. They all have big in the title. The Big Goodbye is the first one. The latest is The Big Bout, which involves boxing in 1943. And the previous series I mentioned, the John Jordan series, all have blood in the title. Power in the Blood, Blood of the Lamb, Blood Moon just came out. And there's 10 in that series.
Let me throw something at you because we were just talking about this today. If you're ever looking for illustrations or thoughts for anything where you're carrying further with your boxing character, I was talking to somebody today about the book, The Pictorial History of Boxing. If you get a chance, just for ideas, it's a really, really interesting book.
It's interesting you say that. When I've heard James Lee Burke many, many times say that he owes his career to reference librarians. And I've thought often how when you're writing a novel, how many people help, how many people assist. And for The Big Bout, a really good friend of mine who's always been an early reader and given me input is not only a huge boxing fan, but he and his dad have been collectors for years and years and years. So I was going to say gave, but they lent me some of the most amazing memorabilia, some of the old magazines, early Ring editions, the coverage that was taking place in the country, 42, 43, 44, where the book is set. And that's, not only is that antiquarian, but that's so helpful. And as so many people do those kind of things. I was recently in Tampa for the book festival down there. I saw Allan and a lot of dear friends. And one of the fans of this series that I'm talking about, the big series, came up and handed me a book. And she said, "You have got to read this." And it was called When Books Went to War. That book has influenced the new big book that's coming out this year is called The Big Blast. And I talk about the influence of books on the servicemen in World War II when hundreds of thousands of copies were given away in these little armed force. Yeah,
the armed services.
Incredible book. I highly recommend the book to everyone, but it had such a huge influence on my book, on my novel. And I'm constantly, things like that. They're serendipitous, but it shows the generosity of the book community of readers who I've found to be the best people in the world.
Except for those that use their personalities for birth control devices, but that's another joke. Since book dealers and reference librarians are sources of material, I've always had a novel in my heart, but I could never get it out. So I give you the thought: the first intergalactic book fair in some mysterious book.
Nice, very nice.
So,
are either one of you familiar with the series? I think there's only a couple of books in the series. I think maybe he abandoned it, but it's a mystery series that involved a book collector.
Oh, you're talking about Book to Die and Overbooked in Arizona.
Yeah.
Well, the first biblio mystery, I think, was written in America in the 1870s. Large red brick cloth book. Can't remember the title, but I remember the color of it. There were a few, like Murder in the Bookcase in the 20s and 30s, and a few others. It's a beautiful genre, you know.
Murder at the ABA.
Another one, more modern, Isaac Asimov. Murder in the Bookcase. I have the book. It's a 1930s novel where they have bodies in your Wernicke globe cases on the back cover. You know, that's you see these bodies in Wernicke globe cases. And it said Murder in the Bookcase or something like that. Turned out to be a fairly scarce book. I saw it in somebody's catalog for $300 or $400, you know, but that was something I collected, so I wasn't, you know, maybe this year, I don't know, you know. After I found out in the last few years saving 90 editions of American Book Prices Current isn't going to get me anywhere, maybe I will sell that. So you obviously specialize in generalities, so to speak, from art and archery to Zen and zoology and so on. With what you have in your collections, do you ever sell books?
I do. I was thinking, as you know, this library that I have is, like I said, tens of thousands of books. I don't know exactly how many I have, but I have sold or given away far more than I have now in my collection. For a very long time, I did not. I could not bring myself to give or sell a book away. But, you know, there's this issue of space. And to be honest, I have, over the last several years, really gone through a transition in my collecting, because I do have quite a collection of signed first editions, primarily in the mystery, crime fiction genre, that I cherish and I prize. But at a certain point, I realized that, you know, I needed books I could actually read, you know, that I could open up and crack the spine and study and research. And so can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I just disappeared for a minute.
And there's no echoes, which is great.
But I have recently, in recent years, collected less of those type books and bought more of the books that I can mark up and really use as opposed to admire. But I have a lot of different types of books, but there's certain categories that I have the most of. Like I have a lot of writing books, as you can imagine. I have a lot of signed crime fiction, first editions. I have a lot of theology books because that's philosophy, theology, and psychology are big favorites. And then I have a lot of Florida books, as you can imagine. And then a great deal of film books because I've studied film, I've written screenplays, I've dabbled in film a little bit. So that's sort of the categories I have. And for a short while, I owned and operated an antiquarian bookshop in Tallahassee, Florida in the early 90s. It was short-lived. What I brought there was not something Tallahassee wanted at the time. I really don't know what I was thinking, but I was a kid and I thought, man, as much as I love books and especially signed first edition collectible rare books, you know, if I have a store with those in it, everybody's going to rush here and get theirs. And I made it about a year, I think. And
bookstores are made up of books we bought today, thinking we would sell tomorrow, that we still have 3 years from yesterday. Yeah, I hear you.
Stephen, you have one book that is intriguing to me.
Which one?
It's. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Stephen.
No, it's
Michael. Okay. Stephen, you have several books that are intriguing to me. Michael, you have one book that is particularly intriguing to me, and it comes from the old English detective genre, and it influenced you in some of your current writing.
When I started, let me back up. In 1990 or 89, I was going through a dusty old bookstore in Atlanta, as I often did, and I came across this edition of something I'd never seen before, which was the crime stories of Father Brown. That was my first introduction to a clerical detective, and what I went on to write a series about. So I fell in love with G.K. Chesterton and all of his writings. I like his nonfiction and his fiction. He's a great writer, great thinker. And when I got serious about John Jordan and creating my version of the clerical sleuth, I started collecting Chesterton. And so I went in search of as many of the first editions as I could find. And I have a lot of old British editions, the true firsts of his work. And those are probably among the oldest and most precious books to me that I have. So definitely love those.
You have them
you can show?
Sure, yeah. I'll have to, if it's okay for me to get up and come back, I would love to bring some things and show you guys.
You can do that at the time that Stephen...
Go ahead, I'll do a little ad-libbing.
Okay, I'll grab a few things to share.
I got a book, and Thorne, if you're out there, I want to say thank you. It came in today's mail. Thorne is a member of the Grolier Club, and he sent me the book, the catalog, of the exhibit that they're having of objects in the shape of books that aren't books.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, you know. This lady, Mindel Dubanksky, I believe, put the collection together. And the fact that there's so many things in here that I have, I feel flattered. I wasn't sure what I was going to see in here. Whether it was going to be stuff that was so exotic that, it was unaffordable. Because I know there's some Serves porcelain books that go for thousands and thousands of dollars. But I would say that I have just about 50% of the objects that are listed in this collection and more. I'm definitely going to be corresponding with this person. Michael, just to fill you in, my sickness is was objects in the shape of books that aren't. My collection of things that my wife and I collected was objects in the shape of books that aren't books. The Grolier Club just came out with an exhibition of objects in the shape of books that aren't books. The Crossley radio, bars that look like books, anything that was a book that when you open it up is something else. We had a collection that filled up an entire alcove booth in St. Petersburg. I probably have 95% of the collection still, which says something there. But I was just flattered with the Grolier Club when they were putting it on. I thought this person was going to have a collection that made mine look like, a Ford Falcon to a Rolls Royce. But it was interesting to see what they had. Go ahead. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, I pulled out a couple. This is the very first book in the series, The Innocence of Father Brown. I could not find any with any kind of dust jackets at the time. Probably and I have several, that were, part of the Father Brown series.
Can you show us the title page?
Sure.
Title page of those?
I'll come back to that in a second. I wanted to show you this. This is probably the best Chesterton book I have.
Turn a slight angle.
Let's see. Is that
right? Perfect.
Is that better?
Right there. Yeah, that's good.
And this, he drew as well as wrote, and so it has illustrations and really beautiful book. The Colored Lands is what it's called, and he always doodled and made little. Of course, he did a lot of publishing, and he constantly illustrated But anyway, so that's the colored lens, and that's
Do
probably
you have all of his works? Do you have one of everything?
probably not. I think I got pretty close, but he was very prolific. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at a quick list right here. The Innocence of Father Brown, Poet and Lunatic, Scandal of Father Brown, Secret of Father Brown, Colored Lands, what you said, Collected Poems, Club of Queer Complaints. And which one was his first book? Graybeards at Play, Rhymes and Sketches. Yeah.
so this
Very
is this is going back to, and this is not a first edition. Let me just see where the book, copyright 1911, and then this John Lane Company was published in 1911, and that's when it was actually created. But a lot of these crime short stories back then were first published in magazines, journals, literary publications, and then later collected. The interesting thing about this to me is Chesterton was staying with a boyhood friend of his and wanted something to read, and went down to the library, this old country library in their homes that they had, and couldn't find anything. And so he said, well, I'll just write something myself. And so out of that little idea he had to do his own work, he created Father Brown that night. On this, I wanted to recommend something else, not an old book, a brand new book, but I found it. You can't do that? Is that against the rules?
No, that's perfectly all right. But one of our listeners, Ahmed, says, are your favorites fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction. I do you mean of Chesterton or in general? I definitely, I probably read equal amounts of both.
In general, he says.
In general, I like probably read more fiction than anything else, but only slightly. I read a lot of nonfiction as well.
Particularly, I would guess your research as you're researching a given book, you're looking at
tons of nonfiction. Yes,
nonfiction in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to recommend this because this is a new book, but it's about old books. Have you come across the Golden Age of Murder? Oh,
that's wonderful. No.
This is it's an incredible book about the early mystery writers who invented the modern detective story. Really delves into these first writers like Chesterton, like Christie, and a lot of the English writers who gave us these crime stories and their relationship to each other, their interactions, and the crime club that they had. It's really a really fascinating read.
I'm sorry, I was just writing back to Ahmed. Did I go off screen for a minute?
No, you didn't. But there's a tendency for especially when you're doing, if you're doing something, there's a tendency for you to see you go off screen.
Yeah, I did. I was looking at the map up there, and all of a sudden my screen went white. But I heard you.
We could see you fine.
Okay, no problem.
The technical parts of all of this still working them out.
In beta.
Still in beta. Ahmed says the only fiction I like is James Patterson and the Alex Cross series of James Patterson.
I'm a nonfiction reader. I prefer it. I was the king of symbolism in college and high school classes. I had enough fiction. And I've come to the conclusion, my life is a fantasy enough. I don't need anybody else's fantasies right now.
All right, there you go. Ahmed, I would just suggest that as a fan of Michael Lister, I would suggest to you that you seek out Michael Lister's Blood series, and also his noir series if noir appeals to you at all.
Michael, how can we reach you?
To me.
My website is just my name, michaellister.com. Lots of information about my books, and also have a YouTube channel with a lot of book trailers and videos. Everything's just under my name.
With what you do on YouTube with the video, do you ever get people calling you and asking you questions about books they may have?
Yes, so I get questions all the time. In addition to what's online, for nearly 20 years now, I've done the Gulf Coast Writers Conference. So I've worked with a lot of writers and get a lot of questions about writing, publishing, promoting, all the time. Okay,
let me rephrase that question. That I understand. When you have this program, does anybody ever ask you about the value of a book?
Occasionally, I do get questions about that. Yes, I'm sure you guys get this a lot, where somebody thinks they have something that's very valuable, and it turns out that it's not, either because of condition or it's a third, fourth, fifth printing, whatever it might be. But that happens more often than anything else.
I say more people know the values of coin stamps, objects of art, and antiques they don't own than the values of the books that they do own.
Yes.
So often people try to equate the age of the book with value, and it just doesn't correlate at all.
No, that's one of my opening lines. If I do a seminar, age has absolutely nothing to do with the value of books. And in some cases it helps in a subject matter, but generally it's not a figure for evaluation.
Yes.
Let me ask you this question. Are you ready for the third degree? Are you
ready or not?
Ready or not? Because here it comes. Okay. Let me explain it to you. The third degree portion of our show, as every reader of old-time detective novels knows, when criminals weren't talking to the cops, they'd give them the third degree. That was the extreme interview method police used to extract information from suspects. Our version is less violent, but maybe just as mentally painful. You ready, victim?
Do I get to have an attorney present?
No. You can't use the fifth.
You don't get to have an attorney until we're finished with you, and then you can call your...
Then maybe somebody, if they're listening, will call an attorney. Okay. Is there a book that you ever not returned to a library or a friend?
Yes.
Remember the title, or is it titled?
Well, I'm going to confess even further. Not only are there books that I've not returned to a library or to a friend, but I noticed recently that I actually have a few books from the prison library where I used to work that have not been returned. So if my old warden is listening, I'm going to get those back really soon.
Don't worry about it. About 10 years ago, I donated, no exaggeration, 4,000 books to the Dade County Library, to the Dade County Jail. So
nice.
Yeah. Okay. What's your favorite guilty pleasure book? The kind you read when nobody's looking.
Oh, wow. Great question. I'm not sure I have a guilty pleasure. I really stand by everything I read. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would find certain types of crime fiction, they would say they should be a guilty pleasure. Goodness.
Well, you write some people's guilty pleasure. You write noir fiction.
But I think if it's done right, it's an art form and nothing to be guilty about writing or reading.
So true.
But I'm just trying to think of. I could tell you probably a guilty pleasure in film far quicker than I could in book. I'm real careful about what I read, and time is so short, and reading is such an investment that I would say the horror movies that I watch is far more guilty pleasure than any books that I might read.
After a long day in the rare bookstore, you got it. You need to unwind. You need it. What's the most expensive book you've ever touched or seen, or both?
I didn't actually handle them, but I was shown and got to be around a first edition of The Big Sleep, Raymond Chandler's book, which I forget the price they had on it, but it was quite pricey.
Oh, yeah. It's thousands today.
Yes, yeah. Also,
I was lucky.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say I was lucky enough to have a copy when it was around 800, but that was many moons ago. Yeah, with a jacket.
This is a very nice edition, and they have the number that comes to mind, and this may be way off, but it seems like it was close to 20,000. Maybe it was not, but
up there.
The first edition of The Hunt for Red October that was published by the small Naval Academy Press, I think it was. It was going for about 7,000 when I saw it, and that was years ago.
Wow.
Same thing for Time to Kill, John Grisham's first. There was small print run, and when he blew up the way he did, it was so. But all three of those I have been in the presence of. Now I have in my own collection a Gutenberg Bible.
For real. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm listening. For real. Hey, wait a minute. We saw somebody had a Shakespeare folio on this program once, and a rice paper copy of the Constitution, and a few other hitherto unknown things. So, it would be nice. I mean, what's the I was going to say the heaviest book he ever lifted. If it was Audubon's Birds of America, that's the heaviest book I think that was ever made. Yeah. Okay. What right now is on your nightstand for reading pleasure?
Well, the Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is not only he's a favorite prose stylist of mine, a huge influence, and that book in particular, I go back to over and over and over again. I have been for quite a while now in the process of contemplating a post-apocalyptic series that I think is quite different than anything that's been done or most things that are out there. But anyway, so as I'm getting closer to writing that, I've been revisiting The Road, and so it's on my nightstand. I think it was on my nightstand. I just brought it in here, so I'll show you. One of the best books of this year, I thought, and I've read it, but I'm rereading it. I think it's Between the World and Me. Very, very good stuff. And then there's one other. Trying to think. I usually have at least one self-help nonfiction type book as well, and I guess When Books Went to War is probably still there, and I'm still going through it.
Ahmed offers that he knows the Coates family very well.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And also, I never heard of guilty pleasure reading. Ahmed, I was just kind of thinking that in my own mind's eye. I mean, I've asked the question many times. How are we defining guilty pleasure? It's kind of with, I guess, a little inference. It's a guilty of pleasure. It sounds like a contradictory term, but I know what you mean by asking that question. You're not alone in it. It doesn't make sense the way you line the words up, but it does with innuendo. Did you ever ruin a book or spill a drink on a book or rip the covers off a book?
Definitely.
Like that?
Definitely. Well, in fact, I can show you. My wife just gave me this a day or two ago. These are pages from my first novel, Power in the Blood.
Oh, wow.
So a book was sacrificed to make this beautiful work of art.
Oh, wow.
So we definitely
Very nice. You're the key to my heart.
Yeah,
nice.
How about that? Nice. So
told you I was the key to symbolism.
I've also read books to death or near death where they barely stay together any longer. But I also have to say, in full disclosure, that I am extremely careful with my books. And you see there, most of them are behind glass. All my collectibles are behind glass cases. And I'm the kind of person the kind of reader who tries not to crack the spine. I would barely open it to read. And, that's usually unless a book is from the jump, I know it's going to be just research, and I'm going to write on it and in it, and then I am very careful with them.
I'm not going to ask you the question, but the next guest on, we're going to go from the nightstand to the bathroom for reading. Alan. Okay, the show grows, a little evolving every day.
I tell you, the nice thing about the world we live in is that your ebooks go with you everywhere, and so you can take them into the bathroom.
We don't talk about that on this program.
It is.
I only read antiquarian ebooks, but.
I mean, I can understand buying a $20 copy of the $10,000 book you got, but I can't read online. Even email. It's like too slow for me. I read very quickly, and once you make that move on the page and it jumps, then you got to refocus your eyes again. You're constantly refocusing your eyes, and I have decent vision, and I'm a sharpshooter raider, but I can't. I'm rated sharpshooter. I can't read this. I just can't.
Ahmed says, "I love the smell of the paper and the feel of the book." Yeah, I agree with that.
I love the smell of old books in the morning.
So, I'm taking you guys are purists. I mean, you no ebooks whatsoever.
No, it's not true.
No,
I do.
Not me. Not
because
even.
As you can tell, I mean, I love Dead Tree books. Love them, and always will. Always collect
Dead Tree books. I like that.
There's you cannot improve on a book as far as I'm concerned. And for me, a hardcover copy, there's nothing better. I like so much better than a paperback. But there is, in my world, a place for electronic versions, particularly when you have a good device or you're stuck somewhere with just your phone. I would much rather be able to read at all.
True. That goes without saying. I'll tell you, I'll give it a praise, but not necessarily for the reading aspect of it. Research. Alan, go ahead. You go.
I have what I found is that it gives me access to things that I might not otherwise be able to get access to. Well, I could, but it's also a convenience factor. I see a book, a new contemporary fiction book that I want to read. I want to read it now, and I can download it and like that and read it. So in that sense, and I can deal with that on the iPad. It's much harder on the iPhone, but the iPad, it works. You lose the feel of the paper. You lose the feel of the book. The experience is very, very different. But it's a trade-off. On the other hand, having said that, the traditional book, an experience that is unlike any other.
Agreed.
I find where reading on a computer has made my life tremendously easier. It's not reading, it's researching. Example, if you had to do an appraisal and you were looking to track books prior to computers, you had to sit on the floor or have a really big desk with elliptical piles of American book prices, current Bookman's Price Index, autograph pricing, reference bibliographies, anything else you needed. Now, you sit down and you go, whatever your search vehicle is, Adol, Viva Libre, whatever, and you've got all that information online. That end of the reading process to me is much, much easier. But for the enjoyment purpose, even when I research stories for the radio program, I find it's easier to print them out and read them on the hard sheet than on the screen.
But you seem to be describing reading on a computer as opposed to a dedicated reading device, which is better than an actual computer screen for sure.
Okay, I'm not aware of that.
It definitely is. That's Edie has an iPad.
Yeah.
If you experienced a book on an iPad, you probably would find it not as acceptable as a traditional book, but you may find it a reasonable substitute.
Okay, sure, I'll give it a whirl. Always open to green vegetables. Okay, and the final question, and it comes from one of our favorite interviewers, James Lipton of the Actors Studio. One of his most popular questions was, what is your favorite curse word, and did you ever read it in a book?
Well, fuck is not only my favorite, but the most versatile.
Are we allowed to do that here? No, I'm joking.
I think the kids are in bed.
This is the internet.
Howard Stern said WABC.
But yes, it's in my books, the books I write. It's in there as well as other books I've read. So yes.
Mike, while this is on my mind, let me say this. In the future, may all your books be rare, and may all your books go into 21st printings.
Thank
you.
Stephen,
I wish that for you.
Stephen, one of our listeners,
how is reading
Luke says that this is his favorite part of the show.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks. That's great. Allan, kudos to you. You created this show and this portion of it. So give Allan props. You know, our creative director has to get some props here.
Absolutely. James Lipton.
You know, Ahmed asked a really good question. How has reading shaped and impacted your life? Wow, well, in every way, shape, or form.
A very, very good question, Michael.
You know?
Yeah, it really is. There's, I would say, there's probably no way in which books and reading haven't shaped or influenced me. I grew up in a very small town in North Florida. There's a state prison here now, and there's more inmates in the prison than there are people in our town. And reading for me was just always, a key to the world, to different worlds. And I just, there's something magic about reading, about drinking in words and the way in which they enter us in the process of reading that I find there's nothing else like it. And so there's no question that reading has influenced me, and not just in what I write, but how I live. And you could make an argument that
somebody's rustling plastic, or are we getting static? I'm hearing a rustling noise. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were getting it also. I heard some noise.
I hear it too, but I don't know what it is.
Okay.
I don't hear it, so I don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, so yes, so reading is definitely formed and shaped me in every way.
No, the same. I was always an avid reader, but not so much of fiction. Required fiction in school, but I remember as a kid reading, books on everything from dinosaurs to treasure hunting to whatever. And even some of those books today, I still quote from some of them. You mentioned psychology before. I'm curious, do you have a copy of I'm Okay, You're Okay and Games People Play?
I have had at some point, for sure. I don't, at the moment, I'm not sure that I do. The Games People Play was something that was recommended probably on my first day as a prison chaplain. And there was I can't remember if someone wrote an article or actually did a book, but there was under the title, The Games Inmates Play was also something I read. And I can't remember if it was just an article or if it was an actual book that somebody wrote, but it's very good and very helpful.
Yeah, the purpose of those two books was to give psychology a common language. Timothy Leary was, before he wigged out on LSD, was one of the eminent psychologists in the country. And he wrote in those. He wrote. He spoke at a. It's mentioned in the book. He spoke at a convention of psychologists and psychiatrists, introducing Eric Burney and Thomas Harris. And he said what they've done for psychology is they've given us a language, because we as psychologists prior to this could not communicate in our jargon as well as baseball players could from opposing leagues, teams, and positions. I fell in love with the books when I read them. I've always, when you said psychology, I had to ask, what you thought of those, and obviously you liked it.
Speaking of taking topics and making them accessible to a general readership, Scott Peck, I think, is one of the first to do that in a such a broad way. The Road Less Traveled. He was an influence of mine. I really liked his approach, and as a very young man, I was doing some volunteering at a psych hospital, and I was their volunteer chaplain, and really enjoyed the work a lot. But they brought Peck in to speak, and so I got to meet him and hear him, as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old young man, and that was a big influence, and really, so on the self-help psychology level, that was huge for me.
Yeah, I like the subject matter. I mean, that I always have enjoyed reading about the human mind, updates in the DSM. I have a suggestion for the DSM for the next publication. It's a syndrome called PIS, Political Identity Syndrome, but we won't go there. I'm just joking. So, will you be at the Florida Book Fair this year? Will you be strolling the floor at all?
Me or Allan? Allan will definitely.
Alan, myself too. Be there. I'll definitely be there. I am grounded to my booth.
I am working on being there. I'm trying to change a few scheduling things to be there. I certainly want to.
Well, we hope you can.
Michael is going to be right. The week before that is going to be in town to do the Sunlit Crawl.
That's what I'm actually trying to juggle a few things around now in order to be able to do that. Okay. But I definitely want to be down there for that.
Certainly hope that you will be able to do that.
Michael,
Sunlit Crawl is part of the Sunlit Festival, which precedes the book. Which begins the week before the book fair, the weekend before the book fair, and includes the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. So starting on the 4th of March, the Friday, I think, before the following weekend, will be the beginning of the Florida Antiquarian, or the Sunlit Festival, and there are this year some 20 events. Some 20 literary events happening during that week leading up to the book fair. So that's a very exciting time for people who love literature. Very exciting time in St. Petersburg.
March 11th through 13th is the book fair at the Coliseum. And to anybody listening, if you are planning to be in town, I urgently recommend that as soon as you finish listening to this program, you make your reservations, because the town's going to be very, very crowded that weekend. Hotel rooms are not going to be readily available shortly. I can tell you there's a couple more rooms at the Bayway Motel on 34th or something like that. Tell Nick Steve sent you, okay? And say hello to the parent in the lobby. If you want to reach Michael Lister, you can reach Michael Lister at michaellister.com.
Yes. Yep. Please do.
And remember, Michael is a writer. He is not a bookseller, so don't be tempting him now.
Speaking of, earlier you asked if I had sold or given away books, and I would, answer that question as to my collection of books. But as a novelist, I've given away my books since I was first published 20 years ago, and I'm approaching the 500,000 mark of my books that I have given other people. Anybody watching tonight who would like to try one of my books can email me through my website, and I will send them a copy of one of my novels for them to check out.
Your email address?
michaellister.com, and your email address?
I'm saying if they go to my website, there's a form there they can reach me.
Oh, good.
That's the best way to do it.
Go to Michael.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go to michaellister.com. Tell him you heard about it on the Rare Book Cafe, and he will happily send you a copy of his book. I should have taken a note. You were talking about giving away books or something.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I stepped away because I've mentioned this book a couple of times now, and I wanted to show it. This is the title I was mentioning when books went to war. Incredible. I had no idea about this until I was given this book. None.
Are you
this had taken place.
When you're talking with.
While you guys are talking about that, I want to go and get something to show you.
You're talking about the Armed Services Edition. That's a book about the Armed Services Edition. Yeah. Some of those are very collectible. I mean, condition obviously is everything, but there's a couple of hundred of them, if I'm not mistaken.
There are, and it's interesting. I actually did research because I wanted some. I wanted to start collecting those once I...
they're not that expensive. I mean, even today.
There's a lot that aren't. A couple of the titles I really wanted were quite pricey. The nice thing about this book is it actually has a list of all the books that they published, when they came out, what year they did, and so nothing about value, but it definitely at least a starting place of what's out there.
Yeah. You know about AdAll, right? If you ever want to find the value, the trading prices of a book, there's a site called ADDALL.com. If you wanted to say enter the title of, one of those books, you go to AdAll. Have you ever heard of it, Michael?
I have not.
Okay. I highly recommend it. I use it for my appraisal work for, some portions of it. It's ADDALL, AdAll.com. When you get there, click on the file folder. I hate the words used books, but click on the file folder that says used books. A form will come up. It will have, the first thing in the form will be a box that says author, title, keyword. Basically, what you would do for one of those Armed Services editions is you would fill out the author's first name, last name, title of the book, and then in the keyword, but don't use keyword until you're really familiar with the whole system. But you would put Armed Services Edition. And then there's drop-down menus to play with. If it's a first edition, if it's signed, search by hardcover, softcover, by ISBN number, and then the magic one, find the book. You can go to the website and find listings for almost anything there because it's an amalgamate site. There's 50 some odd sites, including foreign language bookstores. And that's ADDALL.com.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay,
Sure.
I want to show you while you were talking about the wartime editions of books. Excuse me. I want to show you this one.
Nice. Look
Wow. Yeah.
And this one was published in, and it says, as you can see on the bottom of them, it says, this is the complete book, not a digest.
Yeah.
And then it says, this book is intended for use by the United States Armed Forces only.
Evidently, they did abridged and unabridged versions of the books, depending on the length and what they were doing. I understand from the book that I read that, many of them were read until they just fell apart, and that nearly every service person you saw had a book in their pocket, and they traded. Sometimes they would break them apart so they could read simultaneously.
It'd be interesting to know if anybody ever, their life was saved by one or two of those books in their pocket.
as you can see there, it says Armed Forces Edition.
Yeah.
But now look at this part right here.
The yearly,
is the use that this indicates the use that this book received.
You can see where the thumb was. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Very cool. Allan, is that the only Armed Service Edition that you have?
that I think I have one other one, and I think it's also Rawlings' book, but I'm not certain where it is at the moment.
It might take all the fun out of the hunt, but I think if you were looking for them, for your own self, go to Adall. You'll spend an hour or two finding a whole bunch of them. They will be on Adall for sure.
And they probably will also be at the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair.
Excellent.
Yeah, I see them on the floor, and I'm cursed or blessed, depending on if you're talking to my wife or not, with pretty near photographic memory. I see them every year. They are there.
Yeah.
Nice.
If I find any and you're there, I'll make you a deal. If I find any, one of them will be a gift from me to you if you show up at the fair.
Nice. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Very nice.
And I see we are at Michael. Have you got anything else you'd like to add to the audience, to the program, other than if you are looking for a copy of Michael's books, you can get a copy by going to his website at michaellister.com. Would you?
That's it. I just thanks so much for having me. I really have enjoyed this, and I love, as I mentioned, and as is obvious, I love books. And there's reading, there's writing, and then there's the collecting of books, the care of books. I like touching. I'll just walk along and touch my books, and very often pull one off the shelf just to read a short passage, just wherever it opens, and just read. And I just love them. I have no idea what my kids are going to do with them once I'm gone, but that's their problem.
We don't have kids. I don't know what my cats are going to do with them. Allan, any closing comments? I want to thank you for being on the show, Michael. And let me say this from the heart. We've done quite a few shows. I want to tell you that I would, if it was the Critics' Choice Awards tomorrow night, I would give you the Best Guest Award. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. So did I.
Stephen, I second that. And I would add to those listening both now and on replay that to check out Michael Lister's books. If you have not read them, you need to find copies of them and definitely read them. And one of them that just blew me away and is probably one of my all-time favorites of Michael Lister's books is called Double Exposure. Is that right? Double Exposure. Yes. And it is just an amazing book that literally, it's a cliche, but in this case, it's so true. You can't put it down. You have to read it. You just have to read it straight through. And it's an amazing romp.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. And ladies and gentlemen, that's about all the time we have today. Join us again on the Rare Book Cafe, 2:30 this Saturday. And be sure to join us also this Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. on WDBFradio.com for Bucks on the Bookshelf. Our guest on Bucks on the Bookshelf this Saturday will be Beth Kilmarks. She is the rare book librarian from Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York. And she is like a lady Indiana Jones. I mean, I have her resume here somewhere. It's 9 pages. And while I always ask gemologists if they ever dug for gems, most of them say no. This lady's actually been on a dig and curates miniature book and other collections at the university. So we look forward to seeing you all on the Rare Book Cafe and hearing us on Bucks on the Bookshelf on Saturday. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're in the book field, Happy New Year and book sales to you.
And I will see you. I will be on the road on Saturday, but I will be checking in, and you'll get some reports from various places around St. Petersburg.
For sure. Looking forward to it, Allan. See you on Saturday, guys. Michael, thank you for joining us.
You again.
Join us again.
Would love to. Thank you.
Will you remember us when you get your first Pulitzer?
Yes.
Have a good one, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye. Well.